Welcome, everyone, to another episode of The Creative Minds. Joining me here today is Alex Wisch. Can you start off by telling us a bit more about who you are and what you're currently doing?
Sure. So I do a few different things.
Mm,
So mainly I'm an executive flow coach where I'm focused working with CEOs, executives, entrepreneurs. I also work with Olympic and pro athletes, mostly on the mindset. On the business side, it has to do with productivity, is a big focus. Flow is a state of consciousness where you're fully immersed in your environment, you're
mm,
hyper focused, your brain's working very efficient. So it's not
mm,
like everything's lit up. It's like it's
mm,
minimal activity, but it's working at an efficient level. And you're basically the best version of yourself. It's been studied for quite some years now. A lot of people who are doing extreme sports and have to really be in tune with their environment, their bodies, they get into a flow state. It was also studied for like end of life or almost end of life experiences where that would kind of kick in as like survival. And then, we just gradually start to understand that when you're in this state of mind, your creativity spikes, you're hyper focused, and you're just about 5 times more productive. So that's my main line of work. I also advise companies. I'm an angel investor. So I work with sometimes product development, sometimes making sure everyone on a board gets along or in a company gets along, coming up with some creative strategies, pivoting points during the pandemic. And then outside of that, I am an elite athlete. I've done professional sailboat racing, and then I transitioned during the pandemic to create my own competitions to raise awareness for mental health. And there wasn't anything to compete, and for competition or to train for something, have a goal is really important for my mental health.
mm,
So I created these fitness feats, partnered with Spartan Race. They're a big obstacle course racing organization. We created something called the Unbreakable Missions. And last year, I wore a 24-pound vest, symbolic to the weight of mental illness. Did 1,000 pull-ups, 2,000 push-ups, 3,000 squats, in just around 6 hours. And then this year, I'm going into breaking a world record where I'll be rock climbing the most vertical feet in 24 hours that's ever been recorded. That's higher than the Mount Everest, and that's on it's a little about a 5-degree overhung wall. So what I do is I guess I push the boundaries of human performance, both on a business, a physical, and a mental and emotional level.
mm,
And I show that in my life, and I try to help other people get to that ability to find that balance
mm,
and to live a lifestyle where you're moving forward in a holistic mean,
mm,
and you're gradually building more momentum instead of
mm,
hitting those roller coasters of progression burnout.
mm.
So that was a mouthful,
Yeah.
but that's a little bit about myself.
I just became so curious about the fact that you're so obsessed with challenging the status quo of what one can do in their physical body, but also with your mind as well too, with
Yeah.
programming your mind as well. So what got you to a very low state that you had to do this for your own sake and now you want to help others do that?
So the way I like to put it,
Mm,
talk about mental health. Mental health is a
mm,
big topic. It's something a lot of people, like 1 in 4 individuals, struggle with,
mm,
or will struggle with. And for me, I'm very open. I'm a very transparent person. I
mm,
think the more transparent we are, or if you feel like you can be,
mhm.
the more we'll kind of end up helping each other.
Yeah,
I still deal with depression. I've overcome a
yeah.
lot of the struggles and challenges around
Mm,
depression.
mm,
But earlier in my life, childhood, I was probably a little chubby. I definitely was a little chubby, got made fun of for being fat.
mm,
I always had dyslexia and a learning disability.
mm,
So I guess originally, I was in a special ed, but I just was very determined to
mm,
kind of excel and end up getting A's. So I got out of special ed,
mm,
really pushed to be one of the top students in my class. And along that journey, I excelled in sports, wanted to go in the Olympics in sailing. I was a wrestler, played a bunch of different sports, and did a bunch of different things academically. And along this
mm,
journey, eventually in college, I had this vision of going to an Ivy League college here in the States, in the US. and, also sailing on the team, going to the Olympics. And so I got into UPenn, which is a great school here. And I had a 4.0 GPA, top of my class, pre-med. And then sophomore year, I just burnt out. I hit like an absolute burnout. And I think I pushed the limits a little too hard, to the point where like I was already doing enough to get a perfect grade point average, and then I was doing even more on top of that, which is actually very common among high achievers. They tend to hit this point where it's like, if you actually tone it down to like 25% less, you're still going to have the same outcome. So I hit this point, and what happened was, at school, like, I woke up, I felt off. There was a gradual buildup. Tried sailing in this national event, and I went out sailing, and all I could think about was not wanting to live. And that was the thing I loved doing. It was sailboat racing, and doing the one thing that brought me peace, tranquility, and to have such an association of like, I'm out here and I don't want to live. Then I went home and really begun this journey of, how do I help myself and get out of this depression? To kind of speed up a little bit, about 8 years of my life, I battled with very severe major depression. And my journey involved anywhere from putting myself into a hospital, trying different medications, different treatments, different therapies, to the point where I ended up on disability, and I had no money, didn't really have a home. I was living at these like residential kind of halfway homes, and I eventually hit a real rock bottom. I was at one facility that was eventually shut down by the Board of Mental Health for mistreating patients. It was horrible. Really, it was basically, I was in a setting where I was getting dramatically worse. And I was like, okay, it's either like where I'm at right now, like life's not worth living at all. And either like I need to end it, or I need to do something so different and so drastic that it's going to change the trajectory of my life. And in that moment, when I was at this place, and I'm writing about this, actually, there'll be a LinkedIn post coming out about this. I got a bike, the only thing I actually did own, and I rode it for like 10 hours in the middle of like New York, like not New York City, but like New York, like the boondocks, to get to this more holistic hospital called Four Winds. And it was like this kind of crazy 10-hour journey I had, that somehow a person like me, who doctors were deemed like wasn't going to be a contributing member to society, managed to, ride, 10, 20, 30, 40, however many miles it was, travel for 10 hours, get from point A to point B, being barely able to kind of read this MapQuest had printed out, had no phone, roads didn't have signs, it was like in the woods.
Yeah.
And when I got to that location, that's where I really started my journey to get better. But to kind of sum it up, looking back at that incident and just asking myself, like, okay, I was at the lowest I've ever been in my life, but yet I was able to pull into this higher level of cognition, even at that lowest part where like the depression kind of faded away. And I was able to do something that people who probably people who weren't dealing with mental health struggles wouldn't be able to do. And I was like, well, how is that possible? And that's when I started to question, well, if I can do this, then what else is in my control? And how can I create more of a holistic lifestyle, master the mind, master my physical and mental self to project myself into my future?
So you talked about mental health. So can you define, what does mental health mean?
So yes, mental health. So I'm going to say two things. There's mental health, and then there's mental illness. Okay.
Yeah.
Mental health is a broad spectrum. We all fall on the spectrum of mental health. Whether you're happy all the time, you're sad all the time, or if you're dealing with mental illness, we all fall on the spectrum of mental health. I mean, I almost think of it as like also like brain health too. Okay. So mental health is really, how our brain is functioning, how we're thinking, how our cognition is. And it's not just like in a moment on a day, but on like a week to week, month to month. Okay. And that's like your overall, I'd say, like mental health. And there's things that we can do to fortify, to make our mental health stronger, be preventative, which is the future mental health is going. And then mental illness is more of like when symptoms from mental health, or when your brain gets to a point of an extreme state that it becomes unhealthy, that your symptoms become so severe that they don't allow you to function as a normal individual in society. So there's a little bit of a difference there.
And then you talked about having dyslexia. Then I kind of noticed a pattern that came up as you were explaining. And you're always saying that I always wanted to challenge my body, I wanted to challenge my mind, and I always wanted to get A's, and to the point where you reached burnout. So is it because that you had dyslexia that you had to prove it to yourself that you are capable, and that's why you pushed yourself?
So now we're getting into all sorts of unique questions.
Yeah.
On an honest level, why do I need to prove it to myself to be at this high level functioning person? And I would say, overcoming dyslexia built or helped me develop grit. And grit's like persistency plus, I would say, purpose. But the overall drive to be a perfectionist, to be excellent, on a truthful note, probably comes to my relationship with my father, where he's a very renowned oncologist, and my relation growing up with him was, if you did well, he didn't say anything, but if you didn't do well, he would let you know. So it's probably this unsatisfied sense of nothing's good enough. But at least I realize that now, and regardless, it's something that I'm a little more knowledgeable about.
Yeah. And when you say, would you still consider yourself dyslexic now, or does it like get less as you grow older? Do you learn how to cope with it more? Like, what happens usually as you age?
Yeah, these are great questions. I can only speak from my experience.
Yeah.
But I would say, at a young age, I was fortunate to have a lot of good types of like lessons or education to help me with the dyslexia. It does show up like, and it's dyslexia I had and learning disability. So I would say it never 100% goes away, but you learn a lot of ways to cope. And let's just say if you look at a brain, and let's say like there's a normal passage that information will travel from point A to point B. And let's say for someone with dyslexia, that passage doesn't work properly, right? What happens is your brain kind of rewires itself and creates a new direction to get from point A to point B. So for me, I actually think my dyslexia made it so I had to become more creative in solutions. But where it shows up is, I would say, spelling words, like not the best speller. And this also goes into like working with my clients, where I'm like, look, know your strengths, know your weaknesses. If I acknowledge, okay, I'm not the best speller, maybe not the best with names and dates, that's why I have a virtual assistant. I delegate the things I'm just not good at, and sometimes just accept it.
I think that's a great point, because it's like at a younger age, and even to now, so many people like have this mindset where, okay, you're good at this, great, what are you bad at? And now focus on improving the things that you're weak at. But then the more I grew up, the more I came across different mentors who said differently, who said exactly like you said. It's like, okay, see your strengths, work on your strengths, become better at your strengths. Instead of being a 5, become an 8. And your weaknesses, you could get from like a 1 to a 3, but you're never gonna reach a level like an 8 or a 9, the things that you're good at. So leverage what you're good at, and like the weaknesses, like delegate it, like you said, like delegate what you're not the best at. Someone else would be a 9 and a 10 at that, but you're not that person. And I just like, it was a very interesting perspective in my opinion. So just diving a bit more into like dyslexia, can you further elaborate, what does dyslexia mean? What was your experience with dyslexia, and then when did you know that you had dyslexia?
So what does dyslexia mean? Um, these are great questions. It's ironic because I'm one
Yeah.
that has dyslexia and I don't really understand maybe fully how to define it.
Mm.
I believe going into a definition, I don't know if I can give you an exact definition, but I give you examples. So it's someone, if I were to say,
Mm.
take a right, perhaps I might, an extreme example would be like,
Mm.
take a right, but I really mean take a left. It's my
Mm.
brain kind of mixes up left and right.
Mm.
And so then it can also mix up certain words or
Mm.
vowels that maybe not words, but can mix up certain letters in a word too,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
So you might say one thing, but mean the complete opposite. So that's where kind of dyslexia comes into play.
Mm.
Now, for me, that doesn't happen too often. I know some people that like perhaps didn't get the help they did at a younger age, and like they'll literally say and give directions, be like take a left, right, and a left, and they really meant take like a right, left, and a right.
Mm.
It's gets a little challenging. Yeah. So when I was in school, I went to Wellesley High School. It's a really good public high school system, and I was fortunate just to get testing at a young age.
Mm.
I always had a high, and dyslexia is not associated with IQ.
Mm.
So in fact, they might say some people with dyslexia tend to be more creative, might have a higher IQ, but I always had a high IQ, but there's certain simple things I was just struggling with. And so in school, I was taken out and got some neurological testing done, which then allowed me also to get on like a 504 plan. So, I was able to have extended test taking time in high school. Well, when I was younger in high school, and I also got extended testing in time in college.
Mm.
Whether I needed it, it might have been more because of my anxiety than anything.
Mm.
But it was there as a resource.
Mm.
Again, when I look at mental health is a spectrum.
Mm.
Okay, it's a spectrum, and mental illness, I think, falls at one end of that spectrum.
Mm.
Okay, whereas people fluctuate, and brain health and mental health can definitely fluctuate along the entire spectrum on a day-to-day basis. But where people with mental illness, they fall at an extreme end of the spectrum, and it's consistent, not just on a day-to-day mood change, but that mood, those emotions, maybe someone seeing something, experiencing something that's different than what other people are, that's a constant. Okay. Now, how did I adjust? Okay, so for me, like I said, I still deal with depression, right? And the question is, if you're waking up and
So my
yeah,
question, just to elaborate on this point, so would you consider yourself, because you're dyslexic and you dealt with anxiety and you reached a point where you didn't want to live, like would you consider that this is a mental illness, not just a mental health issue?
I would say I said the dyslexia is different.
Okay.
Dyslexia doesn't fall into a mental. Ooh, these are great questions.
Yeah.
I think learning disabilities and dyslexia are a little bit different on the mental health spectrum. They don't really fall into the category. We use the DSM to kind of categorize mental illness, but they don't really fall into that aspect of the category. They're a little more neurological, which I think is a little different. Perhaps it does fall in like mental health, and maybe there's things like I take fish oil and a few other supplements that help me, but mental illness is definitely far into a part, like it goes pretty hard into one side of that mental health category, where like your general functioning can be really significantly impaired.
And you talked about a point where you reached that you hit burnout. So I'm curious, what does burnout mean to you? Like, how did you know that you burnt out?
Ooh, how do I know I burnt out? Well, what is burnout? So burnout is something I actually work with a lot of people on. And ironically, when I work with a client, I use something called a burnout inventory, where actually I have my clients do this little questionnaire every month to assess their burnout, right? The best way to prevent burnout is knowing when you're going in that direction, a preventative level, and then making changes in your work schedule and what you're doing for active recovery to make sure you don't get burnt out. Okay. What is burnout? Burnout, I would say, you're waking up, you're feeling apathetic, you kind of lost your motivation to work, You're just not caring about your job that much anymore. You might feel a bit down, depressed. It's probably burnouts more on the stage of like a mild depression.
Mm.
And I think it really comes true with you're just not motivated to work anymore. And you're just
Mm.
like, it's like you're at that point where you're just
Mm.
like, I'm done. And you just want to take everything on your desk and just throw it everywhere and
Yeah.
just like walk out the room, right? That's like
Mm.
extreme.
Mm.
But and then there's certain things you can do when you kind of hit that point. It can regroup you a bit, that can get you back to a healthy level again.
Trying to understand how you got into burnout. So you've been studying in university. I'm assuming that you might be at least liking what you're studying for a bit. You're into fitness, you're into sports, you're doing things that you're liking, and you even said you were in a place where you usually go to, which makes you feel alive. But in that moment, you felt that like you no longer want to live. What triggered this all for you to reach a point where you just do not want to live anymore?
Yeah, no, I think you're asking some really great questions. If we look at the human mind, it's
Mm.
something really interesting. And for me being, I've been around a lot of people with a lot of mental health struggles.
Mm.
And if we look at the human mind, what we understand is that we know more about the universe and the galaxy and the world beyond Earth than we know about the human mind.
Mm.
All right. So questions that you're asking are all very good and reasonable questions. And what caused it? There's a couple different factors, and this is where it's not like, let's just talk about depression. Depression's one thing to talk about because people can relate to it, right?
Mm.
Depression itself is on a spectrum. There's a moment where like you're in a relationship, you break up, you feel depressed, right? Or an athlete breaks a leg, they're training for a competition, they feel depressed, right? So there's situational things. Someone passes away in a family, you're sad, you feel depressed, right? And those are some natural kind of cyclic emotions that, after time, you kind of gradually regain strength and you regain your emotional stability and feel better,
Mhm.
right? Now, with mental health, there's a couple different factors coming into play. So there's situations, and then there's also biological. So, for example, my family, I've had couple family members that have dealt with mental illness. So, which meant that I was more predisposed for mental illness. Similar to like this, like if you have someone in your family, being a guy like who has, if there's family members that have prostate cancer, or if there's family members that have breast cancer, I'm using something example like that, you're more likely to have
Yeah.
breast cancer or prostate cancer. It's same with mental illness. You're more
Mm.
susceptible. There's something I use called the DYSLEXIA stress model, where it's like we all have a set point. Okay. So at the end of the day, we are all technically susceptible to major depression or some type of mental illness. It just depends on how much stress would it take for us to get there. Now, for some people, they go overseas, they fight battles, and they come back and they have post-traumatic stress from, seeing death and violence. For other people, maybe let's say like that point is, that set point's a little lower, and maybe it takes like academia or
Mm.
school and kind of that pressure and that anxiety to get to that set point. And when they hit that set point, it's kind of like some genes in your body start expressing themselves,
Mm.
and things in your brain start to fire like they shouldn't, or certain things stop working.
Mm.
So if you think of the brain, it's an organ, similar to like if the heart stopped working
Mm.
properly, what's going to happen to the rest of the body. The brain is just so intricate that if one part kind of stops working properly, has it affect our mood or affect our
Mm.
decision making, a
Mm.
lot of different things. So there's so in my situation going back, I believe one, it could have had something to do with my childhood.
Mm.
Um, Also being a sailor, I had multiple experiences where a boom, there's a thing in the boat where the sail's attached to, there's a mast and there's a boom,
Mm.
and you can get hit in the head. Like in football, they're talking about head
Yeah.
trauma. So I was hit in the head multiple times. So there was
Oof.
questions on, did that kind of help? Did that go in the direction of making you
Yeah.
more susceptible to depression? It was unclear.
Mm.
There's a depression in my family. There's the stress of being in an Ivy League school, and I'm still battling with a learning disability. So it probably was a combination of all the above that eventually like hit me.
Did you have any at least support from family members during that process?
Another great question. Um,
Yeah.
so one thing going into this, I'll say,
Mm.
is that having a support system, and when I say support system, having someone that can advocate for you, because if you were to be at your low, like just think of anyone out there listening, imagine yourself when you were your saddest,
Mm.
right? Or your most challenged situation. Like, how good are you at that point in time to really make decisions?
Mm.
Not great. Not great, right? It's really, really hard,
Mm.
right? Because your mind's so focused on really low things, and you're really depressed, you're sad, and your emotional state, really can start impairing your logic. So having people close to you that know you really well,
Yeah.
that offer you that support, is so essential
Mm.
in the mental health system.
Mm.
People who don't have that support, they end up getting thrown all over the medical system, and it does them a big disservice. And it's sad. And that's a
Yeah.
huge broken part of the system. Now, for me, I came from a father
Mm.
who was a very renowned oncologist, and he knew the body, and he's like, well, medications do this, treatments do this. This is how it works. Where with mental health, it's not that simple, right? People are like, take this medication. We think it does this. We're not 100% sure. And it may do this for you, but we just got to try different medications till we get it right, you know? So with my family, there was some financial support in the beginning. And I think there was a real lack of understanding.
Mm.
But with my family and my family outside of that, I would say like there was a distance. I had some financial support, which I was very thankful for in the beginning.
Mm.
But towards the end, it really came down to me and figuring out what I can do for myself to get myself in
Mm.
a better
Mm.
place. So I want to say one thing, that community is huge.
Mm.
For me, community was a huge step towards getting better.
Mm.
Who you surround yourself with will either bring you further in life, will help you grow, transform, and develop, better habits, skills, and learn, or it's going to pull you back and keep you stuck. We're never, ever standing still in life.
Mm.
We're either moving forward or we're going back. And
Mm.
that's the reality. If you want to think, hey, I'm just hanging out here, this is good, that's not the reality. Either moving forward or moving back. And you got to decide which direction you want to be going in, right?
Mm.
So when it comes to being around people, I'm very picky.
Mm.
Even with clients I work with, like, I need positive energy. I want to be around people that are going to motivate me. A lot to do where I've gotten, and I've done I also did some investments in real estate and had other opportunities, has been because I've surrounded myself with very inspiring people. I've incorporated mentors into my life that have given me like invaluable lessons.